of literature, language, and grammar. All of you are watching, listening, literary history. Now, this term in English literature we study as re means again, nations means birth. Renaissance is a French word meaning rebirth, revival, or reawakening. Chronologically, Renaissance began in the late 14th century in Italy and spread to other European countries and culminated in the 16th century. This age marks the humanistic revival of classical art, architecture, painting, sculpture, learning, and literature, marking the transition from dark Middle Ages to enlightened modern times. Italy was the center of the Renaissance. It was a golden period of Italian history characterized by innovation, imagination, and creativity. It was a time when Europe's classical past was revisited and reinvigorated. This study of ancient Greek and Roman art and literature, called humanism or the religion of humanity, was the hallmark of this age, which was in sharp contrast with the Middle Ages, which, as a historical period, had an inclination towards divinity. Humanism brought about a revolutionary change in the lives and outlook of people, shifting the pivot of thought from religious to secular. Consequently, human beings were placed at the center of life these days. The vibrant waves of Renaissance soon spread to other European nations and accelerated the indigenous development of a French Renaissance, an English Renaissance, and many more such revolutionary changes. Petrarch and Boccaccio were the torch bearer of Italian Renaissance. They thrilled the people by reviving the glorious past of Italy through their works. Imagination of people was further fired by Ariosto's Orlando Furioso, Tacio's Jerusalem Delivered and Machiavelli's The Prince, Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael were the celebrated painters of this era, who aroused and excited people's aesthetic interest. This period is remarkable for outstanding discoveries and invention in the field of science. The potentially powerful innovations such as the mariner's compass, telescope, cloak, spectacles, gunpowder, and paper brought about a revolutionary change in every sphere of people's life. The invention of printing press by Johann Gutenberg of Germany made access to books easy for the common people, and knowledge spread rapidly. The discovery of America by Columbus was yet another milestone in the sphere of exploration. This discovery created an environment of intellectual fervor and inspired other people to undertake such adventurous expeditions. The decline of feudal system, the growth of commerce, and the radical transformation in church were the other prominent events of this period. All these events led to an intellectual reawakening or rebirth of Europe after a long period of cultural decline and stagnation. The sparks of Renaissance fire, which was ignited in Italy, reached England in the late 15th century and continued till the 17th century. It was a cultural and artistic movement. Literature and music were the art forms which were of prime concern in English Renaissance. English Renaissance fermented the intellect of versatile poets, dramatists and prose writers tremendously. This period produced a galaxy of versatile writers whose literary talent remains unsurpassed even today. Some prominent figures were Thomas Sackville, George Gascoigne, Sir Philip Sidney, Michel Drayton, Samuel Daniel, Thomas More, and Francis Bacon. Wyatt and Surrey did pioneering work in the field of poetry. Wyatt is credited with introducing the sonnet form to English literature, and Surrey introduced the blank verse. Sonnet and blank verse later attained refinement in the hands of Marlowe and Shakespeare respectively. Edmund Spenser wrote the legendary verse epic The Faerie Queene, which had a lasting impression on contemporary literature. English theatre was now in the safe hands of vicious playwrights like Christopher Marlowe, William Shakespeare, and Ben Jonson, popularly known as the University Wits. Philosophers and intellectuals like Thomas More and Francis Bacon advocated an advancement of science. More wrote Utopia in 1516 in Latin and later translated it into English in 1551. In Utopia, he gives an account of an imaginary discovered country. This theme is much in harmony with Renaissance spirit. Sir Philip Sidney produced the literary treatise The Defense of Poesy 1595 and pastoral romance Arcadia 1593. Erasmus wrote The Praise of Folly in 1509, a powerful satire on the ignorance and corruption of contemporary times. John Lyly's Euphues 1578 and 1590 is a prose romance which is credited with a new invention in writing style called Euphuism. Queen Elizabeth, who was trained by Roger Ascham, was herself a product of English Renaissance. She wrote poems such as On Monsieur's Departure, Reformation. The English Reformation was a 16th century movement aiming at reform of the Roman Catholic Church and for curbing the authority of the Pope over the Church. This movement was associated with the European Protestant Reformation, a wider religious and political movement. In Western Europe, Catholic Church had become politically powerful. The corrupt clergymen established over people by exploring their religious beliefs, by selling of indulgences for salvation, by promoting people for pilgrimages and other such activities. Churches became centers of corruption due to increase in political power and accumulation of material wealth. This instigated activists like Martin Luther and John Calvin to initiate church reform movement. Martin Luther King laid the foundation of this movement in 1517 with the publication of his book the 95 Theses. Edmund Spencer, Sir Thomas More, and other reformers contributed substantially for reformation of English Church through the writings. The Reformation resulted in split of Christianity and converted much of northern Europe to Protestantism. Protestantism believed in attainment of salvation through individual faith. Therefore, its followers emphasized the need for every individual to read the Bible. This encouraged translation of Bible into vernacular languages and improved the literacy rates enormously. This also checked the powers and role of clergy, who otherwise acted as intermediaries between man and his attainment of salvation. The spread of this movement abolished papal authority and corruption of clerics. It also helped in the decline of feudalism. Most importantly, it laid the foundation of intellectual progress by awakening the common man. Consequently, new knowledge and ideas were propagated. Printing press was invented. America was discovered and great literature was written. William Tyndale translated Bible into English from Greek and Hebrew. Edmund Spencer wrote The Fairy Queen to express his desire for reform of Roman Catholicism. Sir Thomas More, through his Utopia, imagined an island where all religions coexist harmoniously and tolerance is practiced. Puritan age, this period, the period of from 1603 to 1660 is labeled as the Puritan age of English literature. The age gets its name from the Puritan standard that prevailed in England at that time. A Puritan is one who follows Puritan principles and particularly regards pleasure or lavish lifestyle as sinful. The epithet Puritan was assigned to the followers of Puritanism by their opponents. They were sometimes also referred to as Precisionist. Puritanism was the doctrine or school of English Protestants which strictly advocated religious discipline and favored simplification of the church ceremonies. In other words, it aimed at purification of the religious practice. The seeds of Puritanism can be traced back to the English Reformation. It is noteworthy that all the great literary figures of this age were followers of the doctrine of Puritanism. Therefore, historically, it was an age of conflict as well as moral and political revolution. The theatres were banned and closed down in 1642 on the pretext that drama was impious and sinful. The Puritans waged a war for righteousness and liberty for people. They took a revolutionary step and removed the corrupt monarchy by beheading Charles I. Commonwealth was established under the leadership of Oliver Cromwell, which shortly ended with the restoration of Stuart monarchy. In 1660, with the coronation of Charles II, the Puritan age overlaps the Elizabethan age on one side and the Restoration age on the other side. And therefore, the literature of this age reflects the tendencies of both the ages. This age is enriched with many prominent literary figures. There are three major schools of poetry: the Spencerian, drawing inspiration from Spenser. Such poets include Giles, Fletcher, Brownie, and Wither. The Cavalier poets following the footsteps of Ben Jonson. Such poets include Herrick, Carew, Suckling, Lovelace, and Marvell. And the metaphysical poets including Donne, Hubbard, Cresha, Wagon, and Traherne. Apart from these, John Milton was a great religious poet and the towering literary figure of this age, who produced the first great epic in English, Paradise Lost, in 1667. His other important works include El Allegro, 1634, Second Penseroso, 1634, Comus, 1634, Lycidas, 1637, Paradise Regained, 1671, and Samson Agonistes, 1671. In this age, regular or pindaric odes were introduced into English by Ben Jonson. Milton popularized the Miltonic sonnet with the rhyme scheme AB AB CD CD EFZ EFZ. The prose of this age is highly ornate and decorative, modeled after the Elizabethans, and the charming essays of Cowley, written in exceptionally simple and lucid style, leave a lasting impression on readers. This was an age which produced prose classics like the authorized version of the Bible, a collaborative work of 50 years, Brownie's Religio Medici, Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy, and Walton's Complete Angler. Next is metaphysical movement. The term metaphysical means meta means beyond, physical is the concrete, means to transcend, go beyond the physical or concrete. The epithet metaphysical in the context of poetry was for the first time used by the critic Samuel Johnson in his Lives of the Most Eminent English Poets 1779 to 81 in a chapter on Abraham Cowley. Johnson borrowed this term from Dryden's quote about John Donne. He affects the metaphysics. Johnson used this term to refer to the group of writers under the leadership of John Donne, belonging to the beginning of the 17th century. John Donne established a style which inclined towards intellectual complexity. His fame rests on his wit and use of conceit in his poetry. His scholarly allusions and display of specialized knowledge of various fields has always attracted attention from critics and readers alike. He was therefore the flag bearer of the school of poetry, whose members were notable poets like Sir John Suckling, John Cleveland, Richard Cresha, George Hubbard, Henry Wagon, Abraham Cowley, and Andrew Marvell. The followers of this school produced works which have a blend of emotion and intellectual ingenuity. These poets have attempted to explain the emotional and spiritual aspects of life in terms of concrete images and logical reasoning. Their poetry laid emphasis on analyzing the feelings rather than on expressing the feelings. The most outstanding feature of their poetry is with the use of wit and conceits. Other distinct features of poets of this school are their use of colloquial diction, dramatic language, epigrammatic style, comprehension and brevity of expression, and an argumentative tone which is enhanced with literary devices such as pun, antithesis, irony, and paradox. T.S. Eliot, in his influential essay, The Metaphysical Poets, 1921, appreciated metaphysical poets for achieving an association of sensibility, that is, for their works embody a fusion of thought and feeling. On the other hand, Samuel Johnson criticized John Donne's poetry and called his conceits the most heterogeneous ideas yoked by violence together. Restoration period. In English literary history, the period from 1660 to 1700 is termed as the Restoration period. This period gets its name from the great political event, that is the restoration of Stuart monarchy in England, with Charles II ascending the throne after the end of Commonwealth. Charles II was exiled in France in his youth, and on his return to England, he brought with him the French courtly manners and continental literary taste. Therefore, much of the literature of this age reflects the urbanity, wit, and licentiousness of court life. The theatre that were closed down during the Puritan regime were reopened. The arrival of stage encouraged the emergence of Restoration comedy, popularly known as the comedy of manners, and a distinctive form of tragedy called heroic drama. A distinctive feature of this period is the revolt against Puritanism. The Puritan with indecency and levity, both in life and literature, which resulted in degradation of moral as well as of literature. The brighter side of this period is that there was an upsurge of scientific spirit, which resulted in the foundation of the Royal Society of London for the improvement of natural knowledge. The period produced many intellectuals like Sir Isaac Newton. Dryden was the flag bearer amongst the poets, playwrights, and prose writers. During the Restoration period, he was the greatest man of letters of his era, and therefore sometimes this period is also called the Age of Dryden. He was applauded for his poetic works like Annus Mirabilis 1666, Absalom and Achitophel in 1681, the Medal 1682, Macflecknoe 1682, Religio Lacey 1682, and the Hind and the Panther 1687. His satirical poems in particular won him renown. Samuel Butler also gained fame with his poetic work Hudibras, which was inspired by Don Quixote. The poem has a satirical vein throughout. Swift's Tale of a Tub is yet another remarkable satire of this period. With the revival of theatre in 1642, the public hanged around the theatre. The respectable middle class kept a distance from theatre, but the pleasure seekers and the corrupt courtiers were frequent visitors to the theatre. The theatres thus became hotspot for amusement seekers. To cater to the needs of its new class of audience, Restoration drama became extremely licentious. A new genre of serious drama called heroic drama replaced tragedy in the period. Inspired by French novels, the playwrights produced drama depicting extraordinary adventures, superhuman feats, absurd sentiments, sordid passion, coupled with high-sounding pompous speeches. Some of the outstanding heroic dramas of this period are Davenant's Siege of Rohides, Sir Robert Howard's Indian Queen, Dryden's The Indian Emperor, Conquest of Mexico, by the Spaniards and Aurangzeb or the Great Mughal. Thomas Otway was also one of the influential dramatists of his age, who wrote powerful plays like The Orphan 1680 and Venice Preserved 1682, The Princess of Cleves 1690 and The Massacre of Paris 1690 deserve to be mentioned here. Thomas Southern won name and fame with his plays Fatal Marriage 1694 and Orunoko 1896. This age saw the rise of a new form of comedy, popularly known as the Restoration Comedy or the Comedy of Manners. This kind of comedy reflects the intrigues and relations of ladies and gentlemen of the refined and sophisticated society. Here, comic environment is built with the aid of witty dialogues, violation of social traditions, and typical manners of stupid characters like jealous husband, merry wives, and fashionable beaux. Some fine examples of Restoration comedy are Dryden's Wild Gallant 1663, Shadwell's Epsom, Wells 1673, Sir George Athergey's The Man of Maud, or Sir Fopling Flutter 1676, Wycherley's The Country Wife 1675 and The Plain Dealer 1676, Congreve's The Way of the World 1700, Van Brooke's The Confederacy and Farquhar's The Buke's Stratagem. This period is also remembered for a growing number of historians and biographers. A historical narrative, The History of Rebellion and Civil Wars in England by Edward Hyde, Earl of Creden, was produced in this period. Remarkable biographies such as The Life of Colonel Hutchinson, written by his own wife, and The Life of William Cavendish, Duke of Newcastle, written by the Duchess, his wife, are products of his era which received warm reception. Valuable diaries of Evelyn and Pepys further enriched the literature of this age. Daniel Defoe came out with the pioneering model for the realistic novel, Moll Flanders, a realistic novel that won him applause in literary circles. The writers of this period had an aptitude for critical writings. Dryden's critical essays, prefaces, dedications, and prologues were published in bulk. The most remarkable ones are the essays of dramatic poesy and the preface to the fables. Bunyan, a voluminous writer, produced about 60 books. His outstanding works are Grace Abounding, The Pilgrim's Progress, The Life and Death of Mr. Badman 1680 and The Holy War 1682, Sir William Temple, George Savile, Marquess of Halifax, and John Locke were the major essayists of this period. Locke's important essays are Essay Concerning Human Understanding 1690, Some Thoughts Concerning Education 1693, and The Reasonableness of Christianity 1698.